other people. Like, I didn't understand how to interact with my classmates. So that was really hard. But I was able to make friendships when I got into junior high thanks to my youth group. I started going to youth group, and that's where I met the love of my life, who is now my husband, but back then was one of my first friends, Ian Smith. And he met me in junior high at a youth group, and that's how we became friends and eventually started dating. And so my childhood, there were times that people had to accommodate for my differences, and when they did that, it made it so I could succeed more. Now, talking a little bit about my transition into adulthood, like I said, my mom dragged me to Pierce Community College and said, "You're going here." And I was like, oh boy. But when I graduated Pierce, I was still very, first my time at Pierce College, I was able to get accommodation through the school because they had to accommodate for me, my mom, and I demanded it. And I was able to have a professor, I was able to connect with a professor that accommodated for my writing difficulties. Professor Vanderson, who taught history at Pierce Community College, when he would grade my paper, because he had us do our tests, some of our tests on an essay form. And so you had to write out an essay about the topic. And that was concerning for me because I had spelling issues and my handwriting wasn't really good. But I knew what he was saying and I knew the topic and I was able to write it. It was a lot of people would grade me down for my grammar stuff. But Mr. Vanderson, he didn't do that. He looked at what I wrote in the context and he graded from that. And so I was actually able to get really good grades in his class. I got 4.0s in his classes because he looked at what I knew, not the way I wrote it. And so that really helped me a lot. And so I think that's the biggest reason why I was able to succeed at Pierce Community College. When I graduated, though, I was still very, I did not have a good self-esteem. Even though I started making friends through high school, in high school, there were a lot of people telling me that I didn't even deserve to live. I had students telling me it would have been better if your mother aborted you. And so I had a lot of low confidence, even after I graduated from Pierce. And so I didn't really want to go to university. I didn't think I was ready to go to university. And so I tried to get a job through a employment agency that's supposed to help people with disabilities find work. And I got my first job, and that's the paycheck for it right there. I got my first job working on a military base at Fort Lewis. And it was actually probably one of the mistakes of my life because it was actually an abusive job experience. I was verbally assaulted, I was emotionally abused, and even physically, people would push me to get me to move faster because I was slower. It took my time to wash the dishes, and there were a lot of sensory issues. The job employment place, I even told them about all my stuff, and they didn't listen to that. And they said, no, this is all we have, you have to go for this job. And then when I tried to report the abuse, they said, you just don't know what work is like. And it made me feel really low on myself. And the only thing that kept me going through that time was the friendships I developed doing Special Olympics, because I finally was able to get involved with Special Olympics during that time, and that helped me a little bit. I stayed for a year. I stayed in that abusive job until I snapped and was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I just don't want to be here anymore. And I just had a breakdown. And I then tried to help. I then called up my mom and I said, Mom, will you help me get into university, because I think I'll be happier there. Because I knew I wasn't happy right now. And so my mom was so happy. She was like, yes, I will help you. And so my mom, I filled out the application for Central Washington University, and I was scared. I was like, oh, they're probably not going to accept me. I don't know if they're going to accept me. And then I get a letter in the mail, and I got accepted at Central Washington University. And I was able to get out of that abusive job situation, and it made me really happy. I got to Central, and I had the time of my life there, and that's where I learned advocacy. That's where I learned about my rights as a person and as a disabled person. And so I learned that that job wasn't supposed to be doing what they did to me, and that they shouldn't be doing that to other people with disabilities. And so it kind of fueled my passion to do the work that I do now as a disability rights activist. It's to fight for all people with disabilities to not be abused and hurt. Because that's what's happening in our workplaces. That's what happened to me, and I wanted it to end. And so I got really involved at the school. I joined the Disability Student Union called ABLE, and I became an officer. I learned about my own advocacy skills, and I learned leadership skills. I learned also about a lot of social justice issues that affect the IDD community. And when I graduated Central, it made me realize this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to do disability rights activism. And so Central helped me learn this thing called networking, where I meet with people and I set things up. Be like, hey, I want to do this. Can you help me do this? And so after I graduated, I went to Central. After I graduated, I started trying to find work. But before I started finding work, I got married. I got married to this man right here, Ian Christopher Smith. We knew each other since 7th grade. And when I first met with him, I didn't tell him I was special needs. I didn't tell him that I had that I was in special ed. I was terrified to tell him because he was an honor student in school. He was one of the honor students that was getting high test scores and all that. And so I was scared to tell him. But then when I got into later high school and I realized, oh boy, SATs are going to come up and he's going to start asking questions. And so I decided I needed to spill the beans. And I told him, and I'm actually special ed. I'm not an honor student like you are. And I was scared he was going to leave me at that point. He just looked at me and said, that doesn't matter to me. I think you're the smartest person I've ever met. And I don't care that you're in special ed. I think that makes you cooler. And now he calls me his sexy autistic. On January 18th, 2014, we got married. And he's been my greatest supporter, and he says that he's really proud of me, and he's always been there for me and supported me in being who I am. And I think that the way that you find love is you find friendships, and you build those friendships, and someday they may become relationships. That's how it happened